Global Financial Crisis Solutions, a presentation by Global Crisis Solutions 2011. World is in crisis. As we approach 2012, the world is in crisis. The developing countries are starving to death, poverty-stricken, working as slave labour, unable to have a Western lifestyle, and suffering under corrupt regimes. Their people are suffering. While the developed countries are stressed by massive burdens and unemployment rising, with property and share prices falling. Meanwhile, their governments waste money on social welfare and war. Their people are also suffering. Developing countries are poor and starving to death. Millions don't have enough to eat, mostly in Southeast Asia. Developing countries are working as slave labour, unable to have a Western lifestyle. The sweatshop workers are paid anywhere from 26 cents to 44 cents an hour. The developing countries are suffering under corrupt regimes. The developing countries are stressed by massive debt burdens and unemployment rising. The developed countries are stressed by property and share prices falling. Developed countries' governments waste money on social welfare and war. The US government spends 20% of its budget on military spending. Meanwhile, 1 in 7 people in the world go hungry every night. This has to stop. Our global financial and trading systems are broken. The developed countries are sinking under a mountain of debt and soon will be bankrupt because they spend too much and produce too little. Meanwhile, the developing countries will soon have no customers to sell their goods to, as the West will be broke and their own citizens are too lowly paid to afford to buy much. Government debts are out of control. Japan, Europe and the US are all on the verge of bankruptcy. Personal debts are out of control, a debt bubble bigger than before the Great Depression of the 1930s. It's time for radical change. What has been tried until now has failed. Giving more money to poor countries failed. Free trade and slave labour failed. Printing money and going into massive debt failed. But why did the smartest and the best fail to solve the world crisis? Because they failed to fix the cause. So what's the cause? Maybe if we fix the cause we can solve the problem. Some causes of the global financial and trading crisis: too much cheap labour, too much debt and money printing, the fall of communism, bad governments, poor lending practices, corruption, free trade, globalisation. But the real underlying main cause to all the problems is inequalization of wages globally. You can see here that the minimum daily wage in America at $80 is way higher than the minimum daily wage in China at only $15 a day. The Western countries cannot compete with slave labour, and slave labour has no money after food to buy anything. So what's the solution? Well, to fix the cause, of course. How do we do that? We equalise the minimum salaries around the world for those countries wishing to participate in globalisation of services and trade. That is, we set up a global minimum daily wage, say $50 a day, to be phased in over the next 10 years, increasing by $5 a year. At the beginning, many developed countries will pay above this wage. Developing countries will catch up. And how do we do that? We equalise global minimum daily salaries by currency changes and wage increases. Currency depreciation by 50% in the developed countries, or in 100% currency appreciation in the developing countries, or a doubling of minimum daily wages in emerging countries will go close to equalising the minimum daily wage in the US and China, as seen in this example below. The Chinese minimum daily wage could move from 15 to 60, while the US stays the same, equalising the global minimum wage. The developed countries can now compete and have jobs, and with wages doubling in the developing countries, they can defeat slave labour and poverty. A global minimum daily wage will allow all countries to compete fairly in globalisation and will restore balance to the world. It will alleviate much poverty, starvation, unemployment, and will act to equalise the citizens of the world. It does not destroy capitalism, actually the opposite, as it gives encouragement for all to work hard for a fair salary and will restore hope. The IMF and the United Nations, or a new global governing body, can enforce the global minimum daily wage. The wage to be based on an 8-hour working day, and workers should not work more than 5 days a week. Companies are required to pay an additional 10% of the daily wage to an employee retirement account. What are the consequences of a new global minimum daily wage? In the developing countries, you'd see an increase in costs of goods and services, like flat-screen TVs, computers. Food prices might increase. Certainly jobs would increase, which is the problem. Wages may increase. Poverty would decrease. Currencies would increase and asset prices increase. Meanwhile, the developed countries would see an increase in the costs of goods as well, an increase in food prices, an increase in jobs, no change to wages, no change to poverty, no change to currencies, or perhaps a decrease, and the asset prices will stop falling. The money system needs to be revised, so a solution there is a new gold reserve currency to be established and printing strongly controlled at a rate that is steady. This should help control global debt levels and inflation. A certain amount of gold can be put in every coin or every note, and it controls the printing of money and hence controls world inflation. The World Government, or IMF, to establish global guidelines for good governance and countries to be rewarded if they follow these guidelines. Some of these might include government spending to have a balanced budget, or in a budget no more than 20% of GDP, government debt no more than 50% of GDP, military spending no more than 5% of budget, tax incentives and tariffs can be imposed for those that comply or don't comply. Conclusion: if you're sick of complaining about the world's problems and suffering from poor leadership during the global crisis, and most importantly, if you want to see change and real solutions, then email this presentation to everyone you know and to your local government member and media outlet. It's time for a change. A global minimum daily wage is the solution. Tell the world, tell the media, mobilize the power of the people. The suffering has to stop now.